The following podcast is exclusively sponsored by Prabhu Ventures, helping to improve awareness of disability, equality and diversity issues.
Hello, my name's John Perry. Welcome to the Imagine podcast. As it's Black History Month, I'm talking to a lady who has plenty to say about this and other issues. Before we hear from Angelita Woosnam, just in case you hear some strange noises, we were once again joined by Lennon the cat. Welcome, Angelita. Can you start off by telling me a little bit about yourself?
I was born in London and then moved to Sheffield as a baby, probably, I think. Lived there for a while, went back to London, and then I ventured north. So I now live in the northwest. I live in Runcorn. And I've been there for just over 40 years. I've tried to escape, but I keep coming back. I'm a therapist now. I spent a lot of my working life as a secretary, PA, admin sort of person. And then probably about 12 years ago, I took the plunge into self-employment, and I now work as a therapist. I run workshops, and I also run a CIC, a community interest company. We do most of our work in Holton. But also some stuff online. I've got 3 grown-up children and quick count, 5 grandchildren.
Right.
I always forget one, which is terrible. They get very upset with me.
With Black History particularly in mind at the moment, I just wondered if you'd like to talk to me a little bit about that, because we started off talking on the phone about how you felt about Black History Month and the purpose of it and all that. So
my parents were Jamaican. They came over, not particularly part of they were part of the Windrush generation. They came in 1955, 54 and 55. To be honest, they never really talked very much about those days. So when I watch programmes on the television that depict and show and try to recreate the conditions that they would have experienced, I was quite shocked, first of all, but I didn't have any first-hand experience of that. I remember what it was like growing up in the 60s, obviously, and 70s. Black History Month has been sort of a newish thing for me. My growing up was a bit, if I say a bit different, that's probably not the right word. You know, whatever we grow up with is our normal. My parents, my mum in particular, one of her mantras, if it was a mantra, was just to fit in, was not to be different. I'm not very dark-skinned, so as they say now, I could pass for... not quite pass for white, but I could pass for Spanish or Greek or something else. So yeah, growing up, we weren't really, my sisters and I, we weren't really grouped with the black girls at school, but then we were too brown, too dark for the white girls. So we sort of managed to straddle this middle ground, which, thinking about it now, at the time we didn't think about it because that's just what we did. But thinking about it now, it feels like it could have been an uncomfortable place to be.
Now, you mentioned the word passing, and I've recently come across this with myself as well. Would you be able to explain to me a little bit about that? So, being light-skinned, as they like to say, my parents came from one of the parishes, which is equivalent to a county, I suppose, in Jamaica, called St. Elizabeth. So it's sort of in the middle and on the southern coast, quite a big parish. And a lot of the people there, because of their ancestry, are light-skinned. So there's on my dad's side, and also my mum's side a bit, is Scottish ancestry. So imagine that sort of mix. Not very dark at all. Some people have actually got reddish hair. Yeah. There's a lot of Irish in Jamaica too. So there's quite a European mix, if people don't know. So at school, as I said, we were sort of between the two. And then as I left school, I'm thinking, when did I leave school? Sort of early 70s, 70s, and went to work. The questions were never asked. You know, where did I come from? I can't even remember if it was a thing to put on a sheet. We certainly didn't have a black British box to tick then. Right. So just did the best I could and didn't really come across anything that I would now look at as racism until I was looking for somewhere to live. And I was probably about 18, I think. And back in the day, and most of your listeners may or may not remember this, where everybody didn't have a telephone. We didn't have one strapped to us at all times. We used to go to the phone box. I remember that.
Yeah, and we had newspapers with little adverts in, and you had a pen and a pencil, and you'd
make a circle round it and you'd ring that number and ask them if the room was still available. This was in London.
Yeah.
And my sister and I did it. So we had about 6 rooms to see. I was only looking for a room.
Yeah.
And we went round this particular neighbourhood knocking on all these doors. And as soon as the door opened, the room was gone. And the first 2, we were like, oh, okay, okay, thanks very much, and carried on. And it was about number 4 where the penny dropped. And my sister looked at me and she went, let's not bother with the other 2, eh? And I said, no, don't bother with those, because it was obvious that I'd literally rung from the phone box at the top of the road or round the corner.
Yeah.
So in 20 minutes, you know, they've never had a stampede of people coming to look for the room.
Yeah.
And as soon as they saw the 2 of us on the doorstep, it was, no, I'm sorry, the room's gone.
Right.
So that was really my first, no, actually it wasn't, it was the second incidence that I would now say was my experience of racism. My sister was called names at school.
When you were going through this, can you remember how that made you feel, if you're happy to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was only, as I say, only 18, and it was a bit of a shock initially to think that these so-called nice-looking ladies who opened their front doors, who were letting rooms out, didn't want to let me room. And it was just an uncomfortable feeling, I think. I don't think I went into any big drama about it. It just felt uncomfortable.
You made a comment before about your mum talking to you about fitting in, and the only way I can relate to that from my own point of view is as growing up I was told that I had to be 100% better than non-disabled people as a disabled person. So when you were hearing those sort of comments, was that just from your family or was that from other people as well, that you needed to fit in?
Mostly my mum, to be honest, because we didn't, as I say, it didn't come up at school or we didn't have those conversations. It was mostly my mum wanting us to fit in and to be able to get on, as she put it, you know, and do well at school and all the things that parents want children to do. But she didn't want she never wanted any trouble. She never wanted any discussions about anything either. She really, really just wanted a quiet life.
So did she sort of close you down in some ways?
Yes, yeah, I think she did. That's a really good description. It probably did, because it made me think, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't think about it. I shouldn't talk about it. I shouldn't even question it. Just accept it. That's how she thinks we should be. So we were.
Now, you mentioned earlier on about school, and I hope I'm not putting words into your mouth, but I got the impression that because, you know, you didn't necessarily look a certain way or look a certain part, that you kind of fitted in with school. Would that be fair to say, or do you think there were some experiences at school that, looking back at that now, that was probably to do with, you know, people perceiving you as being black or from a different culture or a different race? Or
It's interesting you've just said what your experience was to be better than everybody else. That was mine too.
Right.
Like at school, I had to do the best I could. I like school. For me, it was an escape from home. I did very well at school. So for me, school was my escape, really. So yeah, I did very, very well. I was top of the class in lots of things and just really knuckled down and did that. But again, whether that was a sort of, what's the word, an unconscious wanting to be better, I don't know.
But you know, in terms of once you left school, you've mentioned a lot about your work. So did you go into further or higher education after you left school?
I thought about it, and I was going to, and then I met a boy, as they say, and that that everything went a bit pear-shaped then. I was going to go to teacher training college, as it was then. I don't know what it's called now. But by the time I applied, it was too late, so I went to work instead and didn't do that. And then a couple of years later, we moved up to the northwest, left London behind, and moved to the northwest. And then I had my daughter not long after that. So I was working part-time while my children were young. And then when they were older, obviously went back to full-time work.
Talking a little bit about your experiences with regards to employment, can you highlight any particular issues there that you might have faced?
Not that I can recall. Or if it was, it sort of, it must have just passed me by and I didn't really pick it out because I wasn't looking for it.
Certainly by the way you talk and what I've read, on your social media and stuff, you've done quite well in terms of progressing, through your training, education, and then also like working in employment and for yourself now. So that progression was quite a happy time for you?
As far as I can remember, it was.
Now, you were relating earlier on about the early part of the 70s and stuff like that, and I know that there have been issues in the 80s and even to the present day, I guess. So I'd just like to get your thoughts on about, obviously, looking back on it now, how would you think, or do you think things have improved?
I want to say that things have changed.
Right.
I think there are some things that haven't improved. And again, I don't watch an awful lot of television, but I've seen a couple of things recently sort of going through history, and some things have changed for black people, but a lot of things seem to have changed on the surface, but underneath, the undercurrents possibly are still there.
So you see it more of change as opposed to improving, yeah?
Things have changed. There are more opportunities, I think, now, but there is still racism, unfortunately, and there is still stuff that happens. Yeah.
Would you say, do you see that in general terms, or do you still feel that you might find racism in your own life in any way? Or?
Do I find racism now? I'd say not in the circles that I move in. Possibly if I was still in employment in the workplace, that might be different, or if I was working in the corporate world, that might also be different. But I'm self-employed, and to a great degree I please myself, which is really nice, which is one of the reasons why I'm self-employed.
Can you pick up the point about, could you set up I know there's an online group that looks at racism and things like that, so can you talk to me a little bit about that?
So that came about during the first lockdown, after the death of George Floyd, and there was lots of stuff literally bouncing about all over the place. And one of the things I realised was I didn't know a lot of the answers because of my childhood, my parents growing up, who didn't really talk about black issues, which might sound odd, but they didn't. My mum was really a home bird, a home person. She looked after us very, very well, or as well as she could. My dad was off doing his own thing. That's a completely other story. So we never had those conversations. We never had lots of people round. So a lot of issues that might have come up, probably do come up in other black families for discussion, never came up in ours. So when, as I say, the death of George Floyd, and people were talking about racism and Black Lives Matter and everything else that came with that, again, social media has its good side and its bad side. And I was just watching some of the conversations and realising there was a lot of confusion, a lot of questions that people wanted to ask and didn't feel they could, or wanted to ask and didn't want to ask it in the wrong way and upset anybody. A whole load of stuff around that confusion. It sort of came and went, the idea came and went, and it wouldn't go away in the end. So I did set up, it's set up on Facebook. It's called Open Conversations about race, about, I think, white privilege. I can't remember the title. It's terrible, isn't it? But basically I wanted it to be a space for people, if they had a question, they could come and ask the question. And even if I didn't have the answer, which I don't have all the answers, I could go and find it or ask somebody else.
Can I bring you to, because you mentioned the Black Lives Matters, and so from your point of view, because there's a kind of a for and against that Black Lives Matters, isn't there? There's people who are saying, oh, it's just them spouting off, and it's not going to make a difference, and why are they kicking off again, and all of that sort of stuff. And that sounds quite heavy, but people say all of those sort of things, don't they? And so the purpose of the Black Lives Matters then, how does it personally resonate with you, kind of thing?
So it personally resonates with me in that, because initially I was like, well, why are they doing this? Because again, it wasn't, in my, what do they call it, my circle of people I knew.
Yeah.
But reading into it and looking further and seeing the things that are still happening, certainly more widely publicised in America, but stuff's happening in the UK and in Europe as well. And what my explanation, if I need a description or explanation, is that people who are white or have lighter skin don't experience the same prejudice. They don't experience the same harassment. They're not subject to lots of things that anybody with darker skin or who looks different in any way, to be honest, not just black, may experience on a daily basis. And there were quite a few sort of clips and little story things that people posted. One that sticks in my head is one, it is an American one, and it was a a professor, a very well-educated young man who is a college professor, and he was stopped during his lunch hour. He was going for his lunch and he was stopped just going for a sandwich or going for something to eat because he was black by the police. And that wouldn't happen to somebody who was white unless, you know, they're carrying a machine gun or something like that. It just wouldn't happen. So those sort of, I'll say subtleties, but they're not subtle, they're big things. They were some of the things that really prompted me to start the group and have people to ask questions. And we did have a couple of online sessions at the time, so maybe last June, I think, June, July time when it started. And we had some really interesting people who jumped on and came on and gave their opinion and answered questions or asked questions. People like Lawrence Westgaff, who does a lot of work in Liverpool in the black community, but also he does a lot of work around Liverpool and slavery, who did help me a lot to answer some questions as well.
Have you got any thoughts about, you know, the taking of the knee? Some people think, oh, well, it's tokenism. Some people think it's a good gesture. Any views on that at all?
I didn't, again, this is one of the things I didn't even know about, because being a therapist and a self-confessed weirdo, as my son used to call me, I haven't watched the news for a very, very long time. I don't read newspapers. And I tend, as you said before, to gravitate towards people like me, other weirdos, other strange people. I'm not into what they now call mainstream media. I don't watch it. Yeah. So a lot of the stuff that popped up, I was like, oh my goodness, what is that, taking the knee? If it's done as a sign of respect, and I realise now it goes back to, you know, some of the protests years and years ago. Yeah. If it's a way for people to show their solidarity, you know, I think that's fine. And I can understand why people are like, well, you know, why are they doing that? That looks ridiculous.
I'm thinking about language and terminology, because, you know, you hear like people of colour and, you know, black. And in my case, you know, I like the idea of being known as a blind person as opposed to a visually impaired person. Have you got any thoughts around language and terminology?
I don't like BAME. When I first saw it, I didn't even know what it meant. I had to look it up. But then to call somebody black or brown now is not deemed to be politically correct. So I feel like we're straddling something. I'm not quite sure what that's about. If you know, and somebody said, you know, person of colour, and I was like, to me it just sounds clumsy and awkward. But if that's what it is, that's what it is. But it just, and what else did I see? And again, I had to look it up. BIPOC, B-I-P-O-C. Is it Black, Indigenous, Person of Colour? I can't remember what it stands for, to be honest. Yeah. And again, to me, I just think, why have people made this up? Why can't they just say what it is? I like simple things, otherwise my brain doesn't do complicated. It doesn't. Okay. It doesn't like it.
All right. Now, moving to the present, because you touched on a little bit about the work that you're doing at the moment. Yeah. Can you just give me a brief outline of the work that you're doing at the moment and who it's aimed at and who you're hoping to help? Yeah.
Absolutely. So personally, as I say, I've been a therapist for just over 20 years now, which sounds a very, very long time. I started off with massage, physical therapy, reflexology, that sort of thing. And I've moved more into energy work, different energy modalities. So I work with people now who want to change things in their lives, their emotions, their emotional well-being, mental and emotional well-being, that kind of thing. With the CIC that I work with, we work in the local community, as I said. We produced wellbeing packs last year throughout the lockdown, and we've done quite a lot of work with carer groups. We've worked with children, primary school children too, and this year we've done one and we're just about to do another one, a project with primary children during the holidays, which is exhausting, but it's really good fun.
Do you think that sort of helps break down barriers and attitudes and things like that, working with the younger people?
I'd like to think so. Again, you know, and this came up actually in the programme we did over the summer, just noticing children, how they are and what they say, because as a young child we can only be what our parents have made us and our caregivers have made us, our grandparents, whoever, you know, we live with. And just listening to conversations, you know, some children, you listen to their language and their vocabulary and you think, how do you know that word? And they only know that word because that word's in their house. Yeah. You know, when my oldest son actually was probably about 8, I think, and he we used to laugh about it, saying, he's definitely got the Jamaican gene. He only needs to be outside for about 10 minutes and he goes 2 shades darker. So he was out playing and he came in, I think his sister came back in with him, and these other children had called him names, bearing in mind this is the 80s, called him a packy, and he'd come back in and he didn't know what they meant. And that was one of the few times when we experienced racism as a family. And again, I remember thinking, these children, again, young children, 8, 9, 10 years old, how do they know those words? Yeah. And it's only because they hear it in their house or, their family. So there's still a lot that needs to change. I'd like to think that our young people growing up are more tolerant and more accepting. And I wish I'd brought it with me, actually, but my grandson, he's 10 now, who, if you looked at him, you wouldn't think he's, I'm his grandmother. Very, very blonde, very blue-eyed. But he wrote a lovely poem about Windrush. They were doing it at school because he got so upset about it. He couldn't believe the way that people were treated. And he was really, really, not distressed by it, but really upset about it. And he wrote this lovely poem. And then he took some stuff into school, actually, because his mum works in school. And she said, they're doing this project. Did I have anything about my mum that he could take into school? So I said, yes. So I copied a passport that I've still got and some other bits and pieces. And so she was the subject of their lesson about Windrush, which was quite nice.
You mentioned before about change, and I wanted to try and phrase the question in this way. So if you had one thought in mind that you would like to see bring about change, what would that be?
That future societies are more accepting, more open to people who are different, whether it's colour, whether it's disability, just different people. And if we're not exposed to that, if children don't mix and don't meet other people and don't know that these other people exist, then there's still this separation. So my dream, my wish, and one of the reasons I do what I do is that I hope that future generations don't go through the same stuff that I did.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. So you want to close by giving some contact details if people want to get in touch with you?
So you can get me on Facebook. I'm the Wellbeing Lady. If you Google the Wellbeing Lady, you'll find me somewhere. My phone number is 07808 160 315. Either ring me or send me a message. I'll be glad to talk to you.
Thank you very much, Angelita. I found all that very interesting, and I'm sure my listeners will too. I'd like to end now with an interesting track by The Vow, a Liverpool band. The song is called Disconnect, and I feel it fits nicely in with the theme of the podcast.
Politics is finished. It comes as no surprise that it's all kicking off. Whether it's dodgy politicians lining their own pockets or governments doing dodgy deals with corrupt regimes, corruption is everywhere.
Oppress the oppressor, kill the dictator. Oppress the oppressor. I disconnect from you. I disconnect from you. Hail the rule breaker. I disconnect from you. I disconnect from you. I disconnect from you. The radio is beyond redemption. The television will not be revolutionized. The radio is beyond redemption. The television will not be revolutionized.
politics is finished. We like to think we're an example to the rest of the world. The only way ordinary people have to get their voices heard is to shout out loud. There's so much anger in the world. We really do live in the age of rage.